Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Talking Deals with David. I'm David Edgar. I'm a corporate M&A partner with the global law firm K&L Gates. And today I've got a really interesting one, which I think we're going to tie into M&A a little bit, but also talk about a lot of other things. And I'm joined by Chad Aboud, who we were just talking before we got on, have sort of connected toward the end of last year on all things kind of LinkedIn related, and had been kicking around this idea of getting together on a LinkedIn Live. And so, Chad, I'm super happy that, we were able to finally work it out and get you on.
I love it. David, thank you, man. Thank you for doing this. For everyone that can learn more about M&A, what you're doing is incredible. It's really difficult for lawyers step out on LinkedIn and share what they think, especially on the law firm side. So, man, I just want to say thank you for having me. Thank you for doing this. It's incredible what you're building. So I'm pumped for this.
All right. Well, it's terrific. And what I love about you, Chad, and I think is really interesting for people that do M&A, either in a sort of a corporate in-house environment, or want to build their practice, as I do on sort of the outside law firm. You've kind of been everywhere, and I definitely want to dive in a little bit about that. But for people who aren't following Chad on LinkedIn, you have to do that. I mean, so the first thing, like right now, is just click on the follow. And one thing I did learn, a little technical LinkedIn thing. I'm sure you know this, Chad, but I think people have been asking me, saying, well, I've clicked your bell, but I don't get the content. There's actually, when you click on it or hover over it, you can sort of select, whether you get all the content or, only the top posts. So if people have followed us, either one of us, and you want to make sure you're not missing things, make sure you sort of click on that, get every post. Now, in my case, you may be like, I don't want any more posts from this guy.
Out of here,
I
dude.
can only, how many can I how many can I tolerate in one, in one
no
week?
Chance, but, man. No chance. And we have, I saw Vivica Hess jump in there, talk about knowing your technical LinkedIn, expertise.
She's great.
She's amazing at that. And also cheers to Owen McGran, who's another legend on here, who writes, hey, you know what my favorite thing about Owen is, beside the fact that it's like seed counsel launch and everything, is, have you ever read his Saturday newsletter?
Absolutely. Every Saturday. I get that. I wake up and I get that. It comes in.
Me too, man. Me too. If you want to read some really thoughtful writing that ties business, legal, and music together, and he puts a soundtrack in, it's incredible.
Yeah, definitely. Linking it to the soundtrack. So yeah, people, I mean, it's great that we're getting, comments in. And so, as always, people that are watching, drop comments in. We'll try to, check those and make it interactive. And I can't say, it's so great, Vivica, that you're here, and Owen, because two people that I know for both of us, but I think for me, when I just started posting, at the end of last year, I connected with both of them. Owen actually lives near me, and so we've had a couple lunches, and so great time. And as you mentioned, he's launched this Seed Counsel, which is sort of a subscription-based service for startups and founders, and it's really, I think it's going to serve a real need for that. Yeah, so that's awesome. And then Vivica, I think I attended one of her master classes a week or so ago. That was really good on LinkedIn, and figuring out how to jump into this kind of big pond, which is as we were talking offline, is kind of scary, especially for people in larger law firms where it's just not encouraged. It's not something that people have a lot of experience with. I know I didn't. I just started making one post, and then one became two, and gradually became a little less timid posting. But I think you had kind of a similar experience of just kind of getting in and starting to post and sort of feel out what content resonated with people.
Definitely. I didn't post for 10 years. I didn't even know what LinkedIn was about, other than seeing if people move jobs. And it wasn't until a little bit in 2021, but only really January 2022, that I started posting at all. And I think what I can see from that journey, and it's the same thing for yours, David, what I see from the outside looking at yours, is a few things. Like, one is, it can be difficult one-to-one in your local city environment, wherever you live, to find folks that are thinking on a complementary wavelength, right? Like, you live in Pittsburgh, and Viv lives in San Diego, and I live in Toronto, but we can lift each other and support each other, through a platform like this that doesn't rely on our geographic proximity. So That was one thing that really struck me, was the ideas that I had about client relationship management between law firms and legal teams, or whatever it is about the industry, how you grow your own career. Sometimes what it took for me was to go to a platform that just had the raw numbers that allowed me to find folks that were on a similar wavelength, because it helped me refine my own thoughts, because I finally had a place to put them where people were like, yeah, I get that. And what next? And it wasn't just a door that stopped it. It was like, okay, great. Like, what else you got? And so, and I see that in you, what you've built here and with these LinkedIn Lives brings so many different elements together to like touch on the piece that relates to deals, but also relates to like building a career that's like meaningful for you, learning more, growing your skill set. And so if we hadn't done it, I know we wouldn't have that. We wouldn't be here. And so it's just a win, sharing your journey is just a win.
Yeah, it is great to kind of put things out there, and you get that, you feel like a bit of a startup, founder or something like that, right? You're sort of like having a product, and I tell people, I remember the first time I drafted a real post, not just sort of, sharing law firm content or something like that. And I think I sat there for 4 or 5 hours and just had it kind of saved. And
Totally.
and Victoria kept telling me, oh, did you post it? And I'm like, I'm really worried about, hitting that button.
Right.
What if, what's going to happen? I just had a million, bad scenarios, and then hit it. And, and of course, not much happened. It was sort of, just silence, but I just kept doing it a little bit. And I do think it helps you to kind of get connected to your audience a bit and think about, what you're interested in. And you talk about
Yes.
that a ton, about how do you identify those natural skills and traits. And that's what I think of you. I think of you as somebody that really has the courage to do that and take action based on that. But how did you develop that skill set of being able to just, I mean, you went from big law to
Mhm.
to in-house positions,
Yeah.
ultimately general counsel positions at sort of global tech companies, but then to just take a step back and say, I want to pull the ripcord and do something else. That takes an incredible amount of courage, a lot more than just hitting post on LinkedIn. So how were you able to
Mm.
do that? Was that a skill that you've always had the ability to do, or did you sort of work up into that over a course of years?
It's kind, my friend. So if I look back, and this is something that like I encourage a lot of people to do, is that I think, especially for lawyers, we're always about like, what's next? What's next? What can I do next? And if you like think about that mountaintop climb, then you're always thinking like, I'm gonna grab that next thing, which is great, but also like, well, what's the journey you've done? Because it really helps inform like your skills, your abilities, what you're drawn to, what you're not. And so when I look back over my journey, like I this was always a choice ever since I was a kid. I went to multiple elementary schools. I went to multiple high schools. I went to multiple undergrads. I went to multiple postgrads. Like for me, it was always about, even when this wasn't overtly encouraged, it was about like, where am I feeling like I'm creating and capturing the most value? I just really believe about life that we have this really uncertain amount of time. And the greatest gift that I can give to myself and hopefully to my communities is what I am most naturally meant to give. Like everyone who's here, you, me, we can all do lots of things. We're smart enough. If we work hard enough, we could do it. Sure. It doesn't mean we should just because we can. And so, what I think about all the time is like, what is the environment and what is the personal growth I'm looking towards to bring out the best that I have, not just what I can give. And so, it's kind of always been a little bit in the background, but I think the part that allowed it to come out is I look back a lot and reflect on it. Like, how did I feel about that? Was it good? Even if it was hard? Did it feel like something I should be doing? And so it kind of gave me the courage. And I think, like, I took my first big leap actually, besides all those different school jumps that I would do, is when I was in Big Law. I was in Big Law for 5 years, probably would have been your junior, David, like doing M&A, corporate finance, or public companies. And I really realized two things very quickly. One is massive respect for professional service advisors, right? Like it is complicated, demanding, intense, and folks are executing on that level of complexity all the time. It's really impressive. And so I said to myself very early on, like, you're going to gain a lot of skills here, my friend. But the second thing I realized is, all right, what are you drawn to naturally without being forced to do something? It was two things: helping people find the most in themselves and making the way forward easier. And the way that came out is I gravitated towards training junior lawyers and coming up with ideas to streamline deals. Why are we doing these 5 things? They have like 2% value, but they take up 30% of the time. Why don't we just whack them out, rely on the other things, and charge the client the same if you want to? That's called increasing your profit and less strain on the people doing the work. So I was always drawn to these things. And what I realized as a third-year lawyer, maybe these weren't the things that, my environment at the time was really looking for me to focus on. And so this is how my brain started saying to me, like, what can you do that's driven more towards your natural energy? That was the beginning of it in my legal career.
Well, I like one of the things I love about your post is that, you sort of distill down these really big kind of life choices that can take you in completely different directions, but into kind of very, I guess, actionable bite-size ways that you can, I think you refer to it as sort of no cost, but actionable type, things that
Yeah.
you can do on a day-to-day basis to sort
Right.
of incrementally make change. I do think a lot of lawyers, particularly who've been in big law, but I'm sure it's not exclusive to that. You're just, as you said, you're sort of used to a pattern. You're used to milestones. You do X, then you become this, and you move
Yeah.
forward. And it is really hard to take a sort of a more bird's eye view of the world and sort of your place in it and say, well, these aren't really my strengths. Maybe I'm doing great at it, but they're not really my strengths that drive me. But then how do you translate that into action?
Yeah.
And actually do it. You were able to, at various kind of inflection points, make that shift. Were those pretty easy for you to do, or did you do a lot of, oh boy, what did I just do, or what am I planning on doing? Was there a lot of that, or are you pretty comfortable when you make decisions that, I don't know what's around the corner, but I still want to go there?
Great question. And as you were talking about why lawyers struggle with it, the first reflection I had in my mind is because we're so trained to do like these big, hairy things and execute on them. And they take a lot of energy and we do them and we achieve them. But I think it trains our brain into thinking win equals big, hard, draining thing. And so the reason why I talk about these quick and no cost actions a lot is because if you want to move the trajectory, it's very difficult to ask someone, hey, go from here to all the way over here. Add this big, hairy, draining thing into your life, into your career. It's just hard. Even if people are like, that sounds like it makes good sense. It's just too hard. And so that's why I'm always speaking to these, like, it'll take you 30 seconds. And we'll talk about some of those today, about when you're creating the bonds between law firms and clients, 30-second things that cost you no money, because those are things you can actually do in your life, especially when they fit into a natural flow of how you're operating that day with the tools you already use. That's how you find change. So for me, that's how I started to do it. Is I'm never looking to do the biggest, hardest, most different thing, because I love practical progress. I love that. And this big theoretical thing that could be amazing, if it's not going to happen, I don't care. I don't care about that. What I want to see is something that will actually make something better for me now. And so I will look for these things that I don't have to invest maybe money, or I don't have to invest time to test. Sometimes the things that are floating around in your head, when you get them out of your mouth, they don't feel right. Or sometimes they feel 1,000% right, but you won't know unless you test it. Well, how do you test it? Quick, no cost. So when I thought about, 2021, I'm GC of this international tech company, and I had been living this achievements, milestone life my entire life, sports, school, career. And I kind of looked at myself and I said, okay, so now you got the general counsel title, you built a team, you've done the legal tech, you've done the M&A, you brought the companies together. Like, what next? And unless I was going to be GC of an even bigger company, if that is a next, I had run out of the next. And so I said to myself, like, this is funny. What are you going to do, man? And so then I said, well, you've had all these ideas rattling around in your brain forever about the industry. They're not working one-to-one in Toronto to have the impact that you want. What else can you do? Well, quick, no cost. I said to myself, the only social media platform I have is LinkedIn. It looks easy enough to figure out how to hit a post and then publish it. Okay. So all I got to do is like write down one of these thoughts and then put it out there. And yes, okay, the first one takes a little longer than they do now, but quick, no cost. And that was how I got going, because the risk profile was low. The investment was low. but the ROI could be really big. And so that's kind of the mindset that I'm always using so that it doesn't seem too big and too hard.
And that kind of built, so that daily kind of habit of doing that gave you, I guess, a feedback loop. So you were able to kind of see whether, the things that you were talking about, mattered to people or resonated a bit. And the nice thing about LinkedIn is you sort of do get somewhat feedback. I mean,
Yeah.
people will engage and you can, get a feel for it. Now I have kind of gone different directions in a way. And I think one thing great about your posting is you really have been able to drill down in sort of an area that people want to learn about. And yet you're able to approach it in a lot of different angles from different ways. And which I think is really, really fascinating because you can read those. And even if I read something that I think I may have read before that you posted, it's always a little bit fresh. It's new, or I'm in a place maybe where it triggers me a bit differently.
Right.
So it
Right.
catches you in a different way than it might have done if you'd seen it, 3 months
Right.
ago or something like that. So that's a really interesting thing that I've never thought about, before starting to post on LinkedIn. And I really never thought a lot about how am I being perceived. It just wasn't. It was not a. I don't know whether it's a blind spot, weakness, whatever it is, but I just was always kind of heads down, focused on
Right.
getting the hardest deals, the toughest deals,
Right.
doing those well, being a great negotiator, a great deal lawyer. But, one of the things that really struck me in one of the early posts I read was when you shattered that illusion of mine in a way. You may have been the first, maybe not, but, you kind of brought it home when you said something like, look, that kind of stuff is just table stakes. I think
Yeah.
was the phraseology that you used. And I was
Yeah.
thinking, wait a second,
I know.
the strengths and the skills that I think I
know.
have are not, they're just the baseline stuff to get into the table. I'm in trouble. That doesn't, how am I going to get beyond that? But talk a little bit about that. Hopefully I got that right. But that I remember very clearly kind of really struck me and mattered to me. And I think that's one of the reasons I think I started to follow you more regularly.
I appreciate that. What's funny is that it struck me too when I was in Big Law, that concept, when it hit me. I remember doing big deal. We were about to close it. I'm talking to the investment banker and I'm saying, can you believe we're closing this thing? Blah, blah, blah. The investment banker said to me, like, in my mind, that deal's been done 6 months ago. Like the money was raised, like this was execution phase. And that really struck me. Now, listen, when I say all these things, I'm not trying to make value judgments about what's a better place in the legal ecosystem. The message I want to share through all this is you need to reflect upon who you are to figure out what matters to you. They're all good places to be. You got to figure out the one where you can make the greatest impact for yourself personally and for your organization and the people that you support. And so when I heard that, the thing for me is I felt like my impact in doing that legal work in the way that I want to impact, that got hurt a little bit because I was like, oh man, you're not living this same theme that I'm living in terms of trying to impact on the legal side. And I said to myself, like, my impact might be something a little bit different. And so when we talk about things like the legal work, it's like if you're doing, if you're a full-time lawyer, if you're in a big law firm, you're doing deals like David is, like, I would hope for you that there's an element of you that loves it for its own purpose, right? Because like this is how you find purpose in every day instead of, the way that I was living for a long time, which is like, okay, if I just get that next milestone, then I'll have like made it. I'll have like proved to myself that what I'm doing makes sense. No, like the folks that are the greatest doing deals, they find purpose within the deal itself because they like that journey. They like impacting it in that way. And so when I talk about, and you nailed it with the way that I phrased it about like being a great lawyer, is that like, say that you had a plumbing issue in your house, a water issue. You're going to bring a plumber into your house and be impressed that they know how to put the pipes together? No. That's why you hired them. That's why you paid them. You would be impressed with that plumber? If like the communication was great, they're reliable in terms of their price they promised, the time they said they'd be there, how much effort it would take to fix, that the result was the result that you wanted, that they were curious about like how you kind of got in this mess in the first place so that you're not going to run into it later. Like all of these things, that's what you'd be impressed with. Not that they know how to do plumbing. That's their job. That's what lawyers do. That's what external counsel does. But the great news about this is we can stop pulling the one marketing lever that almost every law firm in the world just pulls, which is we're the smartest. First of all, not true. There's too many lawyers for everyone to be the smartest at what they do. Clients don't believe this anyway. Other great news is it doesn't matter, because most of the work that clients are sending to law firms, they want it done really well, but it's only like 5% of the time that they're like, if I don't get one of the top 3 people ranked in this country to do it, I'm in trouble. It's not that common. Most of the time they need somebody who's like very good, but of course you are. That's why you work at the firm you work at. So there's so many other levers to pull, which is, I think, where we can really go with this in terms of like how to build that relationship, because GCs out there, the CLOs, in-house teams, they expect you to be able to do the legal work. That's why they hired you. So what else are you bringing to the table? That's where the bond is.
And okay, so let's take that a little bit further. So if you sort of have as a given this idea of, skill set and the ability to get deals done, deals in particular, extremely, especially these days, extremely complicated, a lot
Yeah.
of different moving parts. It's even more important to work really, really closely with the in-house legal teams, also the business teams, to make sure that all of those moving parts are kind of moving together toward a common goal. And I write a lot about that and try to how do you make that better.
Yeah.
But are those the kind of things that move the needle in terms of communicating better, finding ways to work with their internal teams with less friction? How do you envision that? What would sort
Yeah,
of move the needle for you
for sure.
if you're looking for an M&A lawyer to run a deal for you?
Yeah. So, and it's funny that Ian Smith just raised a point, which is almost exactly where I'm going to go. So I think the first thing is understand that this very complicated legal work that you're doing, now, some of it could be regulatory driven, market driven, especially with public company stuff. Of course, it has to happen. But the point of the thing you're working on isn't the legal work. That's not the point. The point is some business goal, a business project, acquiring another company, selling an asset. Like, that's actually the point. And so that is always the starting point, is that in a law firm, you're just doing legal work all the time. And so you feel like the legal component is extremely large in the totality of what's going on for the client. It's not. It's just one slice. So, when I was GC of a tech portfolio, we bought a whole bunch of companies. And if you think about it, when you're on the business side, the reason why you're doing those deals isn't for a legal purpose. It's because you want their assets, you want their product, you want their clients, you want their talent, you want their cash. Like, there's all kinds of reasons. And then if you think about what's going to happen once the legal documents get signed and the deal's closed, is there's a whole operational integration that's going to happen that is going to either prove or disprove the theory of the deal. This is the point. And external counsel are being brought in to help with the legal execution towards that point. So if you're a deal advisor, how would you possibly understand that point? Well, there's 2 ways. One is proactive with clients where you feel like they're definitely in the deal space and there's time to do this proactively, but you can also do it in the moment too. So do you ever have the GC, the CLO, CFO, CEO, depending on the C-suite structure, come into your firm virtually or in person to do a little presentation on the company, where they're in their industry, where they're at in their age and stage of maturity, who the players are in the company in terms of the C-suite, what their nature is, what their appetite for risk and growth is, why, and what they intend to do with the deal. There can be share deals that are actually asset deals in operation, but for whatever purposes, tax, structure, seller, they're done as share deals. Well, if you don't know that as an external counsel, you're treating the deal mechanics and negotiation as if it's a share deal, when the buyer may only care about acquiring a piece of technology or a book of business, but they had to do it as a share deal. If you don't know the company, their humans, their nature, the point of what they're trying to achieve, whether it's speed, like, then you can't really service them in a way that actually gives them value. Because remember this, clients' value of a law firm a lot of times is based on their perception of value, not on some objective metric of legal greatness. It is perception, right? Because if deals don't fall apart later and you don't have to activate any of those triggers in the contract, you never really know how great it was. So perception really matters in terms of style and curiosity and humility.
Well, I like the idea of curiosity, because I do think that just having a desire to learn more and put yourself in the perspective of somebody who's in-house and sort of juggling a lot of different demands and also has to translate the legal, technical side of a deal into, what the business team wants, which is to accomplish some of these, objectives and goals that they want to do on the more
Yeah,
commercial side. If you divorce those, and you don't always, as a lawyer, whether you're inside or out, sort of keep those at the forefront, then you're going to go off on all kinds of different tangents that are not
totally.
going to advance the deal, and I assume will then create sort of a maybe a bad feeling on the in-house side that you really
1000%.
didn't understand what we were trying to accomplish, and so how can you really help us if you don't have that deep
For sure.
understanding of it?
It makes people nervous, right? That like, is this advice useful? Doesn't matter how big the firm is. I've had law firms around the world in the biggest cities you can imagine, and it's very consistent that if you don't have enough curiosity, not just for the point of the legal pieces, if you're not curious for the business purpose, you can't understand the legal pieces. The business folks, they don't care about the legal pieces. You have to talk to them about commercial value and operational sense. And then you filter in the legal pieces underneath that. But if you're not speaking their language, they get nervous and they feel like, lawyers being lawyers are going to slow it up. But if you talk to them about deal structure negotiation based on operational needs and commercial value, now you're going to get their attention. Now you can fold legal protections in that they need, that they don't want to burn their brain energy on, because I can promise you, inside a machine, when you are trying to acquire companies, there are a billion things going on, including who in the C-suite is going to survive. Can you imagine how stressful that is when you're acquiring businesses, wondering about what talent is going to remain? And then you get bombarded with a 68-page document saying like, hey, can you review our first draft of the SPA? Nobody cares, right? So it's like, how are you becoming curious about the business realities so that you can do your job the greatest, and so that they go, hey, David's really interested in like what we're trying to achieve here, and he's asking me really pointed business questions. It gives them a lot of trust that you're going to do a great job on the legal side, and they'll support you more when you need their help.
Yeah, and it's an educational thing, I guess, which which I've increasingly come to believe is really on us in terms of the outside lawyers, because clients are not sometimes used to that approach. Because they're not seeing that even among the best, law firms in the world. You get maybe much more of a programmatic, as you said, we may see more of that with generative AI and chat GPT and other things. You may have the ability to almost generate work product, content, and fill in some blanks, and out
Yeah.
pops, one of your SPAs or something like that. But
Right.
it's you have to kind of do that educational process, because I've certainly been on deals where people will say to me, well, what do you mean know the business? People will always say that, right? We'll say
Yeah.
that to associates and even have to
Yeah.
remind ourselves. But what does that really mean? Sometimes when you ask a client on a deal, can I see the the deal thesis?
Yeah.
Where's the preliminary material? I don't just want to see kind of the letter of intent, but
Yeah.
what have you been working up internally to justify that deal? Sometimes you don't need to see that. Why do you need to see that? Might be part a concern about, are they billing me for this?
Right.
But that's the core of what you're talking about. If you don't really understand how this fits into their strategic vision over time, and have a good grounding of where they're concerned about things or where they aren't, many of which aren't directly legal, how are you going to be able to do that? So I think
Yeah.
it's partially just educating
Yes.
your client as to why this is valuable and
Yes.
why this will make the deal run smoother and accomplish their goals,
Yes.
easier.
Yes.
Because if you don't do that and you just sort of sheepishly say, well, I guess I don't need to see that,
Right.
you're not advancing that at all.
That's right. Lead with their point of view. What do they want? They want speed. They want a good commercial deal and something that operationally will support them if there's any friction afterwards, right? So if you lead with all those points and you say to them, like, if I can see this, that'll help me not bother you with legal mechanics, because I can fold in the legal protections that you need and we can put aside the ones that you don't based on the deal thesis. I need to understand the commercial and the operational value here. And maybe that's even a quick discussion with like the chief product officer or whoever it is that's like really driving the deal thesis, because you don't have to know their business the way they know it, but you need to have a sense, which you often get in conversation, from like their risk appetite, the age and stage of maturity, like if they bought this through a fire sale or if they tried to beat an auction. Like if you don't understand these things, how are you going to do the work in the right speed for risk ratio that supports what they want? Because in their mind, they already know all of this. And so there's almost like this built-in assumption that their external counsel will know it too. But of course you can't. So you actually have to inform the client, leading from their perspective, how it's going to benefit them if you can get access to this kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's really true. You mentioned that conversation that you had with a banker where, once they get a deal signed, for the most part. Now, of course,
Right.
our job as lawyers is to deal with the one-off case, but for most deals, when they sign, especially public deals, they close. And so,
Yeah.
for the bankers part of it, the hard work, the heavy lifting, the real creative work is done. And now it's just sort of legal processing that goes through. I remember one time seeing a study that was done that was pretty well done, where they were looking to see whether or not legal documentation matters. And I use it generally. Of course, it matters in disputes or when something goes wrong, then of
Right.
course it matters. But they were looking at, does the quality of the law firm or the quality of the legal work affect the stock price of announced deals? And what they found was there was no correlation between any
Right.
of those things.
Right.
People were looking at these other factors as to assess whether or not the deal
Yes.
was good or bad, and they didn't look at it. And I will say that left me a little depressed for a while, because I thought, well, what am I doing? But it does lead me a little bit as to why I started to post on LinkedIn, because my approach has always been, but I don't think I've really talked about it or figured out the words to use to describe it, was that the way we do deals is broken in many ways. We focus on all the wrong things. Not that they're not important, but they're not critical. And we sort of ignore the more important things, like the
Yes.
integration process, like the commercial aspects of a
Yeah.
deal, speed, all of those things that really matter on the business side. And I think we're in for a big change where deal structures and approaches are going to change. But how do you communicate that to people like you that are sitting in a GC spot? How do you convey that differential? That you're thinking of deals differently, you do deals differently. You may be smart and capable like everyone else, that they're looking at. But how do you actually get that point across without appearing to sort of, just be launching into it, talking about yourself? How do you see that? It seems to me it's a fine line, and I'm always on the wrong side of it, of not really feeling comfortable enough talking about those kind of differences, and the differences the way, our
Yeah.
firm or I approach deals.
You know what? I think the best way to do it is to show it instead of talking about it. And so, like here's one, and I used to use this a lot in my GC life too with my business teams, which is just, the next step away from external to GC. It's the same relationship almost is. And I would always be real about this. So when I felt this, I would actually celebrate the business team for their idea or their project or what they're trying to do first. Get excited about what they've done first, because understand, especially when you're external counsel, there's so much stuff that doesn't even get to the internal legal team, tons of legal things that don't get there. Then there's a whole bunch of stuff that never goes to external. And so the stuff that does, there's a long history there of like oftentimes like the deal machination, the origination, the product. There could have been a previous deal that didn't go through and it was just a commercial discussion for years. And so there's a lot that's happened before you get involved. So I think having the confident humility to say, wow, like this is a pretty interesting deal, like cool technology, or like you're talking about acquiring that company for that tech, like that looks like it could be really impactful for your business. Like if it's a B2C business, you could probably be a user of it, right? And so celebrating them for like the effort and journey that's already happened is big. And this is why, like, first of all, it touches into like just basic 101 human foundation, right? Which is like being seen and appreciated. It is amazing how much we overlook that to talk about ourselves. And so just letting someone know that you see that about them automatically bonds them to you. And two is it tells them you're not only going to be talking about you. which is the biggest fear that clients, GC and business folks have when they go external, is it's now going to become all about the law, all about the law firm. All we're going to do is hear about like all these legal mechanics that like nobody really cares about. And they really have like this anxiety around that, while at the same time having a massive respect for those lawyers. And so if you use the credibility you have to be curious, to have humility, and to celebrate people for like what they've already done before it got to you, you haven't had to offer any legal advice and they'll already love you. You're doing
Just
it.
by sort of having that feeling of appreciation for the work that's
Totally.
been done, and having the curiosity to be willing to ask. I think that is, I don't know if you experienced that when you were, sort of in big law and on the outside, but I do think there is that, and maybe it's a little bit of a lawyerly kind of a thing. There is a reticence to
Yes.
opening yourself up to ask questions. You don't
Yes.
want to seem unknowledgeable. You don't want to seem
Totally.
stupid. You don't want to seem, oh, this part, you should have known that. But, and of course, you should be prepared. So, things I always tell people, things that going into a meeting with a client, you better have read everything. You better have seen as much as you can, looked into the industry as much as you can. You certainly want to be as knowledgeable as you can be, but you have to at some point be willing to have that bit of exposure and be a little bit
Yes.
out there over your skis a bit. Um, and I think people generally respond to that and appreciate that when you do it, but it's
Yes.
hard to do.
So it's such a great point, David, that you raised. This way, like you're so on it, man. Like your clients are so lucky. I actually ask that exact question every time I'm doing a presentation to a law firm about this kind of topic. And I say, like, yes or no. Do you feel nervous to ask clients about their personal career journey, their company career journey, the point of this thing? Are you nervous about it because you feel like you'll sound uninformed? And of course, the reason why there's a lot of hands just by their sides and no one really wants to put their hand up is, of course, they feel that way because that's how we've been trained to know everything. I've got the best news for external counsel ever. We already know. We already know you don't know it. Do you know why? You're not in that industry. It's not your fault. You're in the legal services industry. I don't know the mechanics of how to run a shop like K&L. How could I? I'm not in it. If you're in the tech space, if you're legal in the tech space, okay, you're a lawyer in the tech industry, so you're closer, but you're still not a coder, you're not an engineer, you're not a CPO. So I already know that when I'm GC, like I don't try to tell people how to code. Similarly, when you're in the legal services industry, you're not in tech, you're not in agriculture, you're not in resources, you're not in retail. The clients already know this. They know that a firm like K&L is going to be big enough to have industry expertise from the legal sphere, but we know operationally you're not going to know. That's fine. That's expected. That's normal. What people want is to hear the humility to say, this sounds amazing from like 30,000 feet. Just hearing it sounds like a cool deal. It seems like it's going to drive revenue or it's going to drive client base. Obviously, like we've supported a lot of retail clients, but like I'm not in the retail space every day. Would really love to understand next level about operationally how this is going to work and, so that I can better support you. It almost never happens, that conversation. And when you do, clients are like, thank the heavens, because if you talk to any client, the last thing they want to feel like is they're being told about, oh yeah, the blockchain, it works like this from their external advisors. It doesn't make sense. They're still trying to figure it out. So you can put down the stress because the clients already know that's the reality. They want you to ask.
Well, that's a great point, and I think maybe one way to do that in a less pressure filled environment, where maybe you have a deal, is to do some of the things that you suggested, where you do this kind of offline when, on a
Yes.
clear day, as we
Yes.
say, sort of in the M&A world. And, you engage in these sorts of discussions. You go visit some facilities, you spend some
Yes.
time, meeting people that do different things within the company. It goes a long way. And, and you do that obviously without charge. You do that as a way of
Yes.
sort of investing in the relationship and more importantly, learning the drivers of I always talk about that. I say, but the drivers of the business. And sometimes people say, what do you mean by that? I have to think, but the economic, financial, social, people, all the sort of psychological and economic reasons that
Yeah.
people do deals or people don't do deals. You really have to have a good feel of that and the personalities of the people that are going to be involved. And it's hard to do that if it's we're
Oh, for
doing a $1
sure.
billion transaction and we need to,
Totally.
and if you're wheeling in there looking for a plant tour or wanting to spend time, it's going to sound off,
That's right.
and it's not going to, and people aren't going to be receptive to that. So you have to have a sense of timing, I guess, as you do in any deal,
So
when
so
the
let's
best
make
time to
that
do it.
easy. Let's make this no cost and quick, or as no cost and quick as we can. Here's two ways you can do that. One is pick 3 clients that you value and ask them if you could put in their calendar once a month, once a quarter, twice a year, whatever it is, 10, 15, 30 minutes. It's not charged. It's just getting to know them better. If you pre-schedule it, it is so much more likely to happen. You can still move it, right? But if you don't schedule it, you're never going to choose that clear day. So pre-schedule it. And clients never get this ask. And so most of them would be more than happy to have that time pre-scheduled. Clients are very used to pre-scheduled meetings. It's how it works in industry. You have a million pre-scheduled meetings in your calendar, so it's not weird for them. They'll love that. And then they can share with you all these kinds of things like operational stuff, because that's where their mind will be at in that day, not in a deal. The other one I would offer is like proactively tell whatever clients you want, whatever number you can, if you need a 10-minute steer phone call with me because you feel like you're walking into a fire, just call. And if like I'm an M&A lawyer and it's not my thing because it's a privacy issue or an IP issue, like I'll find someone that can help you for those 10 minutes. And listen, like if your firm doesn't allow you to do that on a no charge basis, some other firm, like you can always bake it in later. You can always capture that time on something real. Clients are fine with that. That type of connection does a whole bunch of things. Keeps you top of mind, proves that you're curious, proves that you're selfless. It's not about telling them this is how we do deals. You are showing them. And here's the magic for you. You learn so much about their business. The GC might be saying, hey, I'm having a really difficult time with our people and culture team. They use a different law firm. We're having all these talent issues. And you might be saying to yourself, there might be an opportunity there where I can support you in a different way on a piece of business we don't have. And also think about how much stickier that bond is going to be. If now, David, you've been meeting with me once a quarter, learning about the operations of my business, and you're so much more up to speed than you would have been just in a one-off deal. When I get the next deal, who do you think I'm going to call? In-house counsel have a billion more things to do than they can ever do in a day. The last thing they want is like stress and friction with their external counsel. You know more about how my business runs? You're the obvious choice for 10 minutes.
Rather than having to add another item on your list of, let me go out and try to, interview 5 other firms, and I've got somebody that we know, we
That's
like
right.
them, we trust them, and
He's
and bring
learned
them
about
in.
our business on
Yeah.
his dime. He's
Yeah.
done a plant tour. I've talked to him once every quarter. I've kept him up to date on where we're going with stuff. That's what clients want. Clients don't want to do RFPs. They do RFPs in a reaction. So think about how much energy, time, and commitment law firms put into answering those to maybe win, maybe not, versus the stickiness of a client being like, not only am I using David, but, and I'm in so many of these GC chat groups and WhatsApp groups where like once a day, someone's going to be like, hey, do you have a lawyer that does this in this country? Who do you think people are going to suggest? They're going to suggest you, because nobody does this stuff. Almost nobody. I'm sure there are some folks, but like I've worked with a lot of law firms in my life and it's not common.
Well, and Ian actually, who's dropping a ton of interesting stuff.
He is.
He does, he's got a great sort of buy side focus practice, and we're actually going to do a LinkedIn Live with Ian and his partner at some point soon. So
Nice.
That's going to be really interesting, talking about exits and talking about structuring deals. So that should be very interesting. But Ian also raised another point that comes down into the practical negotiation sort of phase. The more you can be aligned with your business team, with the in-house team, with the external lawyers, the more credibility I think you have in the negotiation process, the more you come across as well-oiled, consistent in your approach. You have one voice. And I think on M&A deals, that's really particularly important because there's, as you said, Chad, there's so many different work streams, so many different areas that you have to kind of move. If you get the sense that, well, the in-house team is kind of focused on this and moving in this direction, but the outside lawyers are still dwelling on, this thing. But the business teams have already moved on and they're focused on something else. That can easily be taken advantage of in the negotiation process. You can sort of tailor, who you're going to raise certain issues with, how you're going to approach it. And I think I spent a lot of time thinking about those sorts of things. And you can find in almost every deal the ability to do that. and really extract value by doing that. On the other hand, if you can tell that that team has, is close knitted, they're connected, they have a similar voice, they have a similar approach. You can't go to one versus the other. You got to get a similar response. That is tremendously difficult to overcome. It gives a huge
Yes.
advantage on the negotiation deal side, and it results in more streamlined, less
Yes.
expensive,
Yes.
less friction. So there's a lot of benefits to doing that, but it does take some time. It's another reason why you want to have, and I assume, Ted, you have the same view, that you want to have teams that work together regularly, that do deals, not just one time and then 3 years later, because you develop that skill by putting in the reps and by working together and by doing things together. And it really makes an advantage. It gives you an advantage in the actual doing of the deal and reducing costs and increasing speed. So there's actually translatable stuff from the things that you're talking about and that Ian mentions to getting deals done in an
And if you lead
efficient
with
way.
that, lead with that. Business people understand that, right? That's what they love. They love like closing the deal with speed, with least amount of friction. Like they love that. And so when you speak to them from their own lens, for all of the reasons that you said, but you lead with that, you capture attention. If you lead with the granularity of why it's like better for the law firm, no one cares. They think that's what your job is. So lead with the benefits to them, get them on board, and then you can fold in asks that support their point. Right? It's not about us as lawyers. Internal GCs are the same way too, by the way. And this is the other thing I would offer external law firms too, is that sometimes there's this like need to impress with the legal ability to like the GC or whoever you're working with. Like it's not really that impressive. You know what's impressive is like the shortest answer and support in the way the GC is going to use it. GCs are rarely, okay, unless you have like massive deal teams in big companies, but GCs in a lot of companies are not sending SPAs and APAs around to deal folks like the commercial folks. No, they're sending very pointed questions. Sometimes a summary, maybe in a PPT, probably even going to move to Canva one day, like this is how kind of more creative and user friendly it needs to be if you want to be an effective GC. Well, do you know who has massive influence to make the GC seem effective? External counsel. How do you do that? You figure out what's the GC's stage in this, what's their role in this, who do they need to support, who do they need to impress, and how does that happen in that company? Is it an oral presentation? Is it a quick email summary? Is it a PPT because they're a bit more formal and they have these like regular meetings on the deal? Ask and find out. And if you do that, you will be able to support them in the way they need it, which makes them love you. This is how you bond relationships, right? It is not about the magistry of your legal technical brilliance. It's not what clients are caring about. They assume you're going to do a good, competent job on those legal technical pieces. They want the other stuff.
Well, one thing I've done, which I think is sort of a bit of a take on that, is when you're doing a complicated deal, it really does help to learn to simplify and reduce things to their essence, which I think is a skill that lawyers are not very good at, because their nature is to worry about perfection or the minor exception. But you have to have that courage, and I write a lot about that. About you have to be willing to kind of put your view out there, of course, with caveats that you need, but in a way that people can say, this person is giving me actionable advice. And what I like to do, with in-house counsel is if they choose to do presentations internally without me, which sometimes happens, and they want to sort of run that, I often will do without charging them, just some run-throughs, just give them the opportunity to sort of give me the presentation. Let's work through that. Let's see if there's areas that maybe we could tweak a little bit. And most people do take you up on that. It's a fun experience, but it also gives them that ability to make sure that they're not missing anything major. They're not going to be embarrassed, to have misstated something. And I think really making their job easier, less stress, and is a good thing. And it
you should write a post about that. You should write a post about that, David. That's amazing that you do that, man. Like that is so valuable to general counsels, right? Think when I was GC Life, I'm operating 7 types of law a day in 4 countries. There is no I'm admitted to practice in Massachusetts. Doesn't exist in-house. You're doing Singaporean privacy law, okay? Like that's how it works. And so you're going to be out of your comfort zone a lot. And the business folks don't really understand that. Like, they understand you're not an expert in Singaporean privacy law if you're in Massachusetts lawyer, but they expect you to like do enough research and get enough support to figure it out. And so if you have the external counsel, whether you're there with them or you've done the run throughs to make sure they feel confident, they are going to love you for that. That is like such a great point. You do this well in posts. I know you did a couple of them recently that really struck a chord with me, as they usually do. One is you talk about a 1 to 10 scale. And I wrote you on that post because I use that all the time in-house. It is one of the fastest things you can do with business teams to get on the same page when you want to talk about risk versus growth. And don't always talk about risk. You can frame it up in like a growth appetite, right? Like, be on the positive side. This is where business people live. And you can be like, hey, if we're on the excitement on the growth side, 1 being, cash cow, stable, no growth, versus 10 being like founder, startup, everything's in the wind. Where are we at here? Feels to me like we might be at a 6.5. Does that sound fair? And you'll be smart enough to get in the ballpark. They might refine it a little bit, but very quickly you're on the same page, right? You did a good post about that the other day. Another post you did the other day, which is really smart, is, you always have often you have your list of like 1, 2, 3, 4 things that I do. And one of them you talked about in deal points is like the closing mechanics around money. You want to talk about something commercial people care about? Money. Use money as the lever to get a conversation so that you can fold in the other pieces around it. So I think, David, your post was about like closing payouts. Is there going to be like an escrow? Is there going to be a clawback? Is there going to be like earnouts? Like, if you ask about that, you will learn a lot about how comfortable the buyer is to do the deal, how scared the seller is, what the seller's motivation is, if they're going to stay on, if they're not going to stay on, are they trying to run a new business? You'll learn it all on one commercial question. And that will really inform how much you care about reps, how much you care about indemnities, but instead of focusing on these legal points, you made a great point in there about like closing cash mechanics. You'll learn a ton if you talk about money.
Yeah, that definitely gets people's attention, as opposed to, let me talk about these termination provisions and termination fees on page 75. Nobody cares. And you can, I've been in those meetings. I think I mentioned one time talking about doing a poison pill, and and there's a lot of technical things about that. And I can just remember the feeling of the air just sort of coming out of the room, just it. And if you, and this happened, I was sort of acting as co-counsel for a big New York firm that really is, top notch. One of the ones we're talking about that you might just hire, for one of those bet the company type matters. And boy, they spent an hour about, but you could tell from, people texting to, sleeping to just a million different things. And there was no recognition of that. It didn't adjust. I think one thing LinkedIn does, which I think it's helped me a bit. I've always tried to be very good writer and short and get to the point of things, but I will say LinkedIn helps you to do that because one, you have an actual limit, so you can't really go on with it, I guess, unless you roll it into comments like sometimes you say, but you have a limit. And the other thing is, if you're not conveying value, you're going to feel going to feel that coming back. And so like my posts, are longer. I think you've got a great sweet spot. They're not short, but they're not maybe as long as mine. And some people just won't read those because they say, well, David's posts are too long. I have to really put some, thought into those, and I'm going to just move on from those. But then again, other people who've reached out to me say, I actually am getting a lot of value from this. I'm reading every word. And I feel better with that. It makes me feel like, okay, but the idea of being more concise and using graphics and using, you were mentioning Canva. Why not use Canva? Why not use graphics? Why not use carousels, perhaps? I don't think there's any reason not to do that. The substance is in there, and it's presented in a way that people can understand and that they can flip to their business teams. What's wrong with using a carousel or using a chart or something like that?
Business teams use this stuff all the time. Lawyers just don't really know that. But like, I've been in companies where like it's all graphics, like no words allowed on a page, And I think, you raise a great point about like your post, and some people love it. Some people, they like something shorter. Couple things here. One is, you got to do it in the way you're naturally gifted to do it. Like, we got Owen in here joking around about like some of us love depth because he's a deep writer. He's a thoughtful writer. But the thing is, he doesn't just write for length because that's, he just writes long. Like, He's a very thoughtful guy. When you read it, you don't feel exhausted. You just feel like I'm really getting into something. So that's his thing. So that's the way he does it. But here's the thing is when you're servicing a client, is like you need to find out how they're going to use it. Right? Like it's in the service industry. So like, how does the client need it? Like, hey, GC, when you use this at like the weekly presentation, like, is it just oral or is it like a presentation? And if it's a presentation, like, are you guys graphics heavy? Are you guys charts heavy? Are you data heavy? Because like nobody likes text. I can tell you that. Like nobody likes it. Everyone's exhausted. Cognitive load is crazy. The amount of pre-reads that are sent around in companies, it's a fallacy that people can read them. So if you send a densely written, PPT, people are just going to sit there and be like, I don't know, man. Like, I rely on you then. You're not going to get any engagement. And so what is the point of oversharing if nobody cares? Instead, figure out what the sweet spot is for their absorption level and you'll actually get engagement. Then you'll learn more.
Yeah, it's great because and again, this really it teaches me a lot, and I think hopefully people that have been listening, because it is just about having the kind of courage, maybe, but also just the willingness to ask people
Yeah.
and engage with people, which I think, again, I'm tend to be a little more introverted of a person. Sometimes that's more difficult. Sometimes you don't want to get on the call. Sometimes it's difficult to do. But you find that if you take those steps and you just ask people, what would you like to see in this analysis? How would you like it presented? And maybe offer some suggestions, like using these shorter form, visuals like PowerPoints or Canva, or other sorts of ways that can convey it. I just did a project recently where, the goal was, after asking about it a little bit, the goal was to get things onto a one-page, kind of graphic interface that could be used by, business people to understand what their fiduciary duties are.
Yeah.
How does that actually work on a day-to-day basis? What does it mean? Well, that was a tough assignment to get that. You have so much information and knowledge to get that into it, but it turned out to be a good exercise, not only, for us to really do you understand it? Can you convey it in that way? It's easy to appear to understand something by just blurbing, a million different things, but can you really reduce something to its essence? And I think those kind of exercises, and LinkedIn is a way to really do that in a public way, of course, but you force yourself to say, does this make sense? Is it readable? Is it helpful? And of course you'll do things that aren't, and that you look at and you say, why did I do that? But on the other hand, you'll do things that are very good. And I know you've been branching out into videos, which I love because you're great at that. But how did you decide to do that? Is that something that you gradually kind of moved to? Have you enjoyed doing that as a way of sort of introducing people to your voice and your approach and the way the way you think about issues?
Yeah, I mean, like it came from reflecting on what my natural traits and skills are. Like long form writing, like Owen does, like it's just not going to be for me, right? Like I'm just not going to do it. Book writing or something, it's just not as easy for me. You know what is easy for me? Like this. I am, naturally able in a moment to either like send out a video on my topic that I would have otherwise written or have this conversation to you. It's just how my mind works. But like the pre-planning for the writing that Owen does is just not my thing. And so I said to myself, like, why would I be trying to, even though I could do maybe a reasonable job, why would I be trying to fight upstream with something that's not my gift? I got to do my thing. Right. And it's the same way with what you're doing, David, is that like you are bringing people together and helping people learn in a way that I hope is like a way that they can absorb it. It's not too dense. It's a bit more fun. And I guess what I'd love to leave like law firm folks out there who are like doubting this whole conversation about curiosity and humility is ask yourself this. When you have a junior join your deal team, do you want them to ask questions about how you want the deal to be done and what your nature and your style is? Or do you want them to be like, yeah, got it, and walk away for a day or two, blow a day or two, come back with something that's not useful to you? I've been in those rooms. Every time the junior asks the questions and has the humility, all the lawyers that are left in the room turn around and say to each other, okay, that should go all right, because they're clearly engaged and curious and interested. Why would it be any different when you're talking to a client? It's the exact same. That's all the social proof you need.
Well, Chad, you're doing such amazing things. I'm so glad we got to do this, but tell us just a bit about what you're doing now on the consulting side, because I think it's really interesting. And, how can people get in touch with you? What are you, focused on? I know you're doing some law firm consulting. I actually saw a great post that you did where you were sort of talking about coming around first full circle, which was a great image. And I really enjoyed it. I hope I commented on it, but it was a terrific post where you kind of were in a retrospective kind of way saying, look, I'm coming back to the law firm, this time in a advisory consulting role, talking to them about some of the things we've talked about today. And I'm sure a lot more detail, where you used to work. So what are you up to, and how can people, sort of tap into that knowledge and expertise?
I appreciate you. So I've launched my own consulting and coaching business focused on the legal industry. And it kind of has two sides. So there's working with lawyers and small groups of lawyers on their career trajectory, whether they're in a law firm and want to become a partner, whether they're in-house, want to become GC, or maybe they want to move the other direction. And then on the kind of law firm legal team side, doing presentations and training to them about a lot of these concepts, about how you create a greater bond, either with your clients or your business teams, or how you get more talent, how you get your talent to be attracted, to be retained, to be maximized. Because at the end of the day, the work is the work. Like it's a challenging and demanding job, but there's so much value that we can extract that we just leave on the side because we keep doing these one-off hairy, heavy deals or pieces of litigation, and we miss all the bonds that are actually how we keep talent, how we keep clients, how we create a referral network for talent, a referral network for clients. And that's really what makes your career not only more successful, but more fulfilling. And so that's what I've been doing. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm there most days. You can find me on my website, chadaboud.com. And reach out anytime if you're either a lawyer on that journey or you're a law firm or legal team trying to figure out how to get more value out of all this heavy lifting that you're doing.
Well, thanks so much, Chad. This was a really great discussion. I've got a ton of notes. I need to go back and make sure I get some of these emails out and actually implement some of these things. So I'm sure everybody had a great, time listening to you and all the valuable, quick, actionable, no cost advice that you have. And thanks everybody for commenting and participating. I think my next one is May 17th, but I'll have some more information on that. So Chad, thank you so much for doing this. It's been a long time coming. Awesome. And I just had a great time. We did it. So appreciate it. And thanks everybody for joining us. It's
Thanks,
great.
Everyone.
Appreciate it. Okay. Bye-bye.
See you, David.
Thanks. See ya.